I am Agnes Aljas, EMYA judge, and it is my pleasure to introduce this year's winner of the Council of Europe Museum Prize. The Council of Europe Museum Prize has been part of EMYA since EMYA Foundation from 1977. The Council of Europe is dedicated to human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and the prize aims also to highlight the contemporary societal issues, heritage and interplay between local and European identities. The winner has been selected from the nominees' shortlist of 3 candidates based on the recommendation of EMYA jury. And the prize was announced already in December, and the award ceremony was held on 25th of April in Palais de l'Europe. So it's no secret that this year Council of Europe awarded the prize to the Workers' Museum in Copenhagen, Denmark. The Workers' Museum joins the list of winner museums with high empathy, compassion and solidarity. Museum is combining labor history, reshaping the democratic idea of assembling, of belonging, of meeting, of dialogue and discussion across disagreements and divides. So it's good to see that people are sitting now. I have got your attention anyway. And it's a museum which transforms powerlessness into personal agency and collective action. So it's my honor to welcome to stage for the speech the Workers' Museum Director, Søren Bak Jensen.
Can you hear me? Good. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Agnes. Thank you very much to the EMF and the organizers here at MUBA for having me. On behalf of everybody at the Workers' Museum in Copenhagen, I would like to say that it's a huge honor to be here among the nominees for the 2023 EMYA Awards. This was really our ambition when we put ourselves forward as a candidate last year, and we were thrilled when we received the news in December that we had been selected as a nominee by the scarily competent jury of the EMYA Awards program, which spares no effort in their commitment to improving and raising the quality and public value of museums in Europe. I must admit we celebrated quite a bit, but it wasn't more than a couple of days before we got another piece of news which was even more thrilling and very, very pleasantly surprising, which of course, as Agnes said, was that we had been chosen as the recipient of the Council of Europe Museum Prize for 2023. Receiving any prize in the EMYA program is a huge honor, but we were especially proud of receiving the Council of Europe Museum Prize, since it is not just awarded on the basis of the evaluation by museum professionals, but also on the basis of, as an acknowledgement by politicians in the Council of Europe who are committed to overcoming the challenges we face today and creating better futures for all, who are looking ahead more than they're looking back, and who believe that dialogue and reflection founded in engagement with European art and heritage can and should be an integral part in defining visions for the community of Europe and indeed for the whole of humanity. We celebrated again, and most recently at the official awards ceremony in Strasbourg last week. And it's just, I must say that what I've really been looking forward to was to be part of this conference, to be able to listen to presentations, discussions, form new relations with colleagues all over Europe, all representing amazing museums that we can learn so much from. So thank you very much for that. The Workers' Museum engages with the history of the Danish labor movement over the past 150 years and the development of living and working conditions of wage workers in Denmark. Through collecting, documentation, research, exhibitions, events, and one of the most visited educational museum departments in Denmark, we engage with the multitude of organizations, parties, unions, and communities created around the labor movement, the complexity of the working class as a group identity, the ingenuity and entrepreneurship of workers looking to create a place for themselves in industrial mass society, and the commitment to improving not just their own lives, but whole societies in an effort that explicitly and intentionally transgressed cultures and boundaries. Through everything we do, we aim to make an impact beyond the exploration of the past. We work from a mission statement stating that the Workers' Museum strengthens the will to an equal and just society through engaging encounters with history. The mission statement is our attempt to approach the challenge of making museums relevant, necessary, and valuable for the reflection and dialogue people have today about the future of society. And I'm proud to say that I truly think that everybody who works at the Workers' Museum knows this mission statement, knows that it should inform whatever they do in the organization, regardless of their role. But they also know that this mission statement is made up of concepts, assumptions, and whole blind angles that should be interrogated, that we should remain curious about, and that we should explore in order to remain relevant. Basically, the mission statement constitutes a hope of empowerment and emancipation. And to us, questions about democracy, democratic participation, and the confidence to try and make your voice heard is central to that. And what I'd like to talk about in the time that's been given to me is how I believe there is some historical precedents that can truly inform the way that we develop this side of museums. I think important steps have been taken in many inspiring museums over recent decades. But if we are to have any hope to play that role as empowering institutions over in the future as well, there are challenges that need to be identified and confronted. If you want to know what the Workers' Museum is really about, one place to start is with the building that we are located in. We have our exhibitions in public areas in the former Workers' Assembly Hall in Copenhagen, which was opened in 1879 on the basis of what you would today call crowdfunding among workers in Copenhagen. The Danish labor movement was set up in 1871 and was met with quite a lot of resistance from politicians and the police. Workers' meetings were interrupted, the people who rented out the rooms to the labor movement were harassed, and therefore the idea that the labor movement should build its own building emerged quite early. On the weekly payday, Thursday, workers would be asked to give a contribution or perhaps even buy a share in order to pay for the land and the building materials for the workers' own assembly building, and then often turn up on their weekly day off, Sunday, to help with the construction. When the building opened in 1879, it was said in the inauguration speech that it was the hope that the voice of the workers' chorus would be spoken so loudly that it would be heard in all levels of society. But it was also the intention that the building would be a place where everybody was welcome, as long as they were sympathetic to the cause of the labor movement. The building had several functions. One was to provide a place where meetings could be held without the interference, without the risk of interference. Another important ambition was that the building should be a source of income for the labor movement through hiring, renting out offices and meeting spaces. That part never worked. The economy was also always really bad in that building. Even today, it seems to be very tight. So that particular ambition never came to anything. It was a place where it was intended as a physical framework for the establishment of a common identity among the highly diverse group of people that came to be called the working class. One important event in that respect was the May Day demonstrations that we've just had earlier this week, of course in Denmark, but really across the world. There's been May Day celebrations in the building since those celebrations began in 1890. And finally, the building was a place where the visions and dreams of how society should develop could be acted out and tested. One important aspect of those dreams and visions for future society held by the labor movement had to do with democratic participation. The people who built the assembly building and who used it were generally excluded from participating in formal democratic processes. But by going to meetings in the assembly hall, setting up associations, unions, cooperative businesses, making an agenda, taking minutes, speaking in public, participating in discussions, standing for election, casting your vote. A group of people that had no access to formal democratic processes were trained in how to make use of democratic possibilities. They were preparing themselves for when a central goal of the labor movement, the broadening of voting rights, would be extended to them. We sometimes think of the assembly building as a democratic fitness center, and it's certainly a very, very important physical framework for what we do, and also the biggest object that we have in our collection. It's important to say that this is by no means a history that is unique to Copenhagen. The building in Copenhagen was the first of dozens built in Denmark. It is the oldest of the thousands of workers' assembly halls that were built in Europe in the decades around 1900. And on a global scale, it's only the Victorian Trades Hall in Melbourne, Australia, which has a longer history as a workers' assembly building. The vast majority of these buildings have disappeared by now, but a few remain in very good condition. There's the Verruyt building in Ghent in Belgium, the Red Hills Miners' Parliament in Durham, England, the Paasitorni building in Finland, Helsinki, Finland, and as I said, the Victoria Trades Hall in Australia. And we are in the process of preparing a transnational serial nomination for the UNESCO World Heritage List of these and other buildings. They are amazing physical testimony to some very important stories about the social and political consequences of the industrialization, migration, and urbanization of the late 19th century. So fingers crossed. Over the past few years, we've conducted extensive renovation of parts of the building in Copenhagen. The most important parts, the ones holding the main meeting hall and other important meeting areas, meaning that we now have a much stronger basis for using the assembly building as part of the museum experience. We have taken care of the architectural and decorative aspects of the physical building. We've upgraded technical installations, reduced energy consumption, but most importantly of all, we've sought ways to try and make also the intangible heritage of the building come to life, to make the identity of the building as an assembly place be of relevance today. We had a very important sort of guiding motto for the renovation was that the building wasn't to become a museum, which of course is paradoxical since we are a museum. But of course the intention was it wasn't to be a place where you have to be careful around the heritage, you can't do anything. It was a place where the intention of the building as a meeting place for various activities was to be preserved as well. And the way we could do that is by upgrading and reorientating our understanding of the museum as a place where you can meet for many different activities, where partnerships can be formed, and where discussions about many aspects of social development can be discussed, all with a focus on the question of democratic participation. So we have vastly upgraded and changed our organization in order to be able to have many more kinds of activities in the building that coexist along with the more traditional museum aspects of our institution. I think that having the ambition to raise awareness and empower citizens, to democratize heritage and encourage dialogue across boundaries is something that is central to a lot of museums, and I think it's increasingly central to the public support that we have. And important work has been done in many different places, certainly among the museums represented here over the past few decades. But I also think that it's not a role that museums play in and of themselves. And if we want to play that role in the future as well, there are some important challenges that we need to identify and confront. Some of these have been, are well known, have been debated for decades. Said in sort of a bit of a caricature, you might say that in museum settings, as in any other educational or knowledge dissemination settings, there is the distribution of authority and agency is uneven. There are professors and there are students, there are those speaking and there are those listening. And this is often amplified, even perhaps in a more subtle way, in the thoroughly curated museum space and through the normalizing function, which is one of the real superpowers of museums. Enormous efforts have gone into finding ways to diluting these aspects of museums and developing the way in which museums can include communities in the exploration and communication of art and heritage. And as I see it, it's by far the strongest transformative force that has influenced museums in the more than 20 years that I've been involved with these kinds of institutions. At the Workers' Museum, involving communities have become absolutely critical to how we develop our museum. Several years ago, we set up a group, a forum called Museum Rebels, in which young people advise us on the conceptualization, curating, and evaluation of a range of projects. Just as members of communities we hope to form strong relations with, members of unions, young people in vocational training advise us on strategic issues. And one piece of advice that has really stuck in my mind from one of those many sessions is try to hide the fact that you're a museum. It's something that I use quite often to qualify any new idea that may come up. And of course, these kinds of activities take place in many of the museums that are represented here and elsewhere. Oh, this is moving a bit quick. This work, I think, should continue. But I also think that it's at least as important for museums today to consider what we mean when we talk about democratization of museums and democracy in general. Surely, it's only within a very radical understanding of democracy that the authoritative role of museums present an absolute challenge. In our daily lives, we navigate in an often quite constructive, if sometimes confrontational, negotiation between the freedom not to be subjected to a power that we've not ourselves sanctioned, and going by the advice, instructions, and even regulations of experts that we do not question. We follow the champions of freedom and the rule of experts, and we can't seem to live just with either of them. But perhaps the idea of democracy that has been driving the move towards inclusion in museum has been one that has been too occupied in the struggle to incorporate or find a place for the voice of the museum in our dialogue with visitors. To take the voice of the museum, so to speak, out of the equation, to move the museum towards being a neutral platform, somehow outside the sphere of politics, a safe space for things that would in other settings be dangerous, working from an idea of democracy as the absence of authority. I think that today, in a much more polarized world than the one in which the drive towards inclusion began, it's more important than ever that we maintain curiosity about what democracy is. That we move away from binaries of either being democratic or undemocratic, and that we insist that questions about democracy can and must be raised even within countries now increasingly identifying themselves through their, in these days, armed struggle for democracy. That is what our dialogue with communities and museums users should focus on. What kind of democracy is possible and is needed today? I believe that since museums so clearly embody both the point that and the value of freedom to think and the value of experts, they are particularly well suited to this discussion. And I think it's clear that it's a discussion that people are ready to participate in a museum setting. One of the activities that we've learned the most from at the Workers' Museum in recent years is a combined research, exhibition, and educational program called Activist. The starting point of the project is what you might call a crisis in democracy. Since 1960, membership of political parties in Denmark has dropped by 90%. Young people in Denmark are among the most competent democrats in Europe with a detailed understanding of formal democratic processes. But their democratic self-confidence is nowhere as high. They don't believe they have opinions that others care to listen to, and they're worried about the personal consequences of joining political discussions, not to mention running as a candidate. All of this may add to a perception that there is a division between politicians and the population in general, fueling a view of a ruling political elite and a population removed from any real influence. The project aimed to provide and to raise democratic self-confidence by providing perspective on democratic participation and discussing a broader range of making your voice heard and being part of political communities. More than 30 activists shared their thoughts about democratic participation and their dilemmas of their relations with formal democratic processes. And about 2,000 students have gone through the workshops. This project gave us invaluable insight into the sensitivities, thoughts, hopes, dreams, concerns of the generations that we hope will come and use museums in the future, but that we know will come to change the world. And this actually gave me a lot of hope about the impact that museums can have. To keep doing this, to keep playing that role, to keep having this empowering function, I think it's very important that we continue to question our practices and revisit our basic assumptions about what we do. We need to remain curious about what democracy can be and the role and the way in which museum can support it. The EMYA program is a huge support and motivation to continue to do that work. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for your attention.